The Dollar Tree always has a great variety of canvases, and I'm going to show you how you can make 3 Christmas signs using them. My Dollar Tree just got a plus section this year, so when I saw this faux for wreath, I was so excited because I think it is so pretty. So in addition to that wreath form, I'm also going to be using one of the really large stretched canvases from the plus section. These come in a two-pack, and you can see that they're 16 inches by 20 inches. And I'll also need some Christmas ribbon. To make the background for my wreath, I took one of my wider paintbrushes and I laid it across my canvas, and I just used a pencil to create marks, giving me a pretty good idea of how wide I would need to make my stripes. So normally I like to tape off my stripes, but I wanted this to have a more rustic feel to it. So instead of taping off the stripes and making them perfect, I'm just using the width of my paintbrush to act as my guide for the width of my stripes. And you can see here too, as I drag the paint down the canvas, I'm not creating solid stripes. I'm leaving some of that canvas come through, almost to make it look like I dry brushed on the stripes. Once my vertical stripes were dry, then I did the same thing going in the opposite direction. I laid down my paintbrush and added a pencil mark so that I would have a rough idea of how wide I needed to make my stripes. And when I do stripes like this, whether I'm just doing them kind of rustic or if I am going to tape them off with painter's tape, I always like to start in the middle to create my guide, because then that way I know for sure that the stripes on either end are going to match. I hope that makes sense. It's just always been easier for me when I'm creating things like this to start in the middle. So you can see here, I'm just repeating the same process I did as for the vertical stripes, but this time they'll be horizontal. And again, I'm not trying to create a solid stripe. I'm trying to leave some of that canvas material come through so that it looks distressed. And also, it's a little hard to see here, but I did pick the canvas up and continue the stripes along the edges also, just to give it a cohesive look. I really love how this background turned out, and I like that it's a quicker version of a traditional buffalo plaid. Now for the wreath, I did cut the tag off, and it already came with a hanging loop. I didn't want to cut that off in case I decide to use it later in a different project, so I'm just using a piece of clear tape and holding it down. Finishing up this Christmas sign is pretty simple. I cut a length of my Christmas ribbon. You can see I'm just using some peppermint stripe ribbon here. I looped it through one side of my wreath form, and just to make sure that it didn't slide around, I'm just using a piece of tape to hold it in place. That way there's not any hot glue on the back of that. Then I laid my wreath on top of my canvas, and I took both lengths of that ribbon and wrapped it around to the back side. Now you could use a staple gun here because the frame of this canvas is wood, but I am currently out of staples, so I just used some hot glue to hold my ribbon in place. And since the only part of this that has hot glue is just the ribbon at the top, if you wanted to take these apart later to use for future projects, that would be easy too. To create a sign that could be carried from Christmas into winter. So for this one, I'm going to use some of these wooden snowflakes, and I'm also using one of the 11 by 14 flat canvases. You can see this isn't a stretched canvas. There's no frame to it, but it is larger than the traditional 8 by 10. And I also created a decal with my Cricut that says, "Let it snow." Unfortunately, when I took the plastic off of my canvas, there were some brown spots on it. So I did go ahead and give mine a coat of white paint, but if you have one that doesn't have any marks on it, you could skip this step. While that was drying, I took 3 of the snowflakes out of the pack, and I wanted to fill in the holes because this is actually an ornament kit. I'm just using some hot glue here. I have my silicone mat laid down, and I ran some hot glue inside of the hole, and then I just used a craft stick to scrape off the excess. After my hot glue was set up, then I went through with some black chalk paint, and I just gave each of my snowflakes one coat. After I laid down the decal that I had made on my Cricut, then I used my fine tip glue gun and I added just a bit of hot glue in the center so that I could lay my 3 snowflakes right on top of my saying. Now I know not everybody has a Cricut, so if you don't, you could try to hand letter this, or you could even find some really cute scrapbook stickers and create your own phrase. Originally, I was going to stop here and just let this be my sign, but it seemed a bit unfinished to me. So I grabbed these giant wooden craft sticks that I get from Walmart, and using my paper trimmer, I cut 4 of them down to 8 inches. I debated what color I should make my craft sticks. I was kind of thinking maybe I should paint them black because I had painted my larger snowflakes black. But then I decided to add a little more color to my sign by just using the Waverly Antique Wax. And you can see here, I'm just applying it with a wet wipe. And I also had some of these smaller wooden snowflakes in a pack from the Dollar Tree. So I gave those a quick coat of the antique wax as well. I'm just using my sticks at the top and bottom of my sign, and since they weren't long enough to go the whole way across, I had to attach 2 of them together. So just for a temporary hold, I flipped them over and I used a piece of clear tape on the back side. Now, they blend in pretty well. You can't really see the seam of that stick, but that's where that little mini snowflake is going to come in to help hide that seam. So along the bottom here, I just ran a bead of hot glue and then I laid my sticks down. And because I cut these down to 8 inches, that gave me 16 inches altogether. And since this is a 14-inch canvas, it gave me 1 inch of overlap on each side. And then I repeated that across the top of the sign as well. You could add more than 1 snowflake across the top, but I like the simplicity of just having 1 at the top and 1 at the bottom. I wanted to create a hanger for my sign, so I hot glued 2 lengths of jute cord together just on the ends to make it easier to string on some beads. I had these black wooden beads in my stash and I thought it would be a great way to coordinate the black snowflakes. So I strung 10 of these beads onto my lengths of jute cord. Then I flipped my sign over, and where those wooden sticks overlapped in the canvas, that was a perfect place to place my hanger. So I added a bead of hot glue and I tucked the jute cord into that little space. And I always like to hold it in place with a piece of tape until the glue has a chance to set. Then I moved over to the other side. I cut off the excess length, added more glue on the opposite side, and did the same thing. Then when it was time to hang, I just moved the beads so that I would have 5 on one side and 5 on the other. I had some plaid fabric in my stash that I wanted to use up. So in addition to a piece of that fabric, I'm going to be using a larger stretched canvas. This one is 11 by 14, some Christmas greenery, and some burlap ribbon. I laid my fabric face down and then I placed my canvas on top of it. And because this was a buffalo plaid print, it made it really easy. I was able to line my canvas up with the squares so that it was nice and straight. Then I ran a bead of hot glue along one side of my canvas and I just smoothed the fabric into it. After I had one of the long sides glued down, then I worked on the other side. I added my hot glue the same way, and when I was pulling the fabric over, I did make sure that it was pretty tight across the front so that there wouldn't be any ripples on the surface. I'm basically treating the shorter sides the same way I would treat a package if I were wrapping it, because essentially that's what this sign is going to be. It's going to look like a wrapped present. So I cut off some of the excess on the sides. And using some hot glue, I just tucked the corners in so that I could wrap it up the same way you would wrap up a box. Once I had both of my corners tucked in, then I was able to just use some hot glue and fold that flap up. And again, the same way I did across the top, I just made sure that I pulled it nice and tight so that there wouldn't be any rippling. And I did that to both of my shorter sides. Next, I cut a length of ribbon that would fit the whole way across the surface of my canvas. I laid that down and then I put my canvas on top of it, and rather than putting hot glue on the front of the canvas where you might be able to see it, I'm just gluing it on the back side. So you can see here I put hot glue on the piece that was at the bottom, then I pulled it fairly tight and added hot glue to the top. Then I added a second piece of ribbon going in the opposite direction, and I kept it more towards the top side of the canvas rather than in the center. You could decorate this package however you want. I clipped a few pieces off of a Christmas floral pick that I had. I added those where my two ribbons crossed over. And then using that same burlap ribbon, I did create just a simple bow, and I hot glued that right on top to look like a package. Thanks so much for coming to hang out with me again today. I left some videos on the screen for more Christmas inspiration. All right, everyone, have a great week, and I'll talk to you in the next one.